and I'll give the word to Maura, who's the director of the Galway Early Music Festival, who we had many meetings with to discuss our conference and then discuss how we can have the conference without being in Galway. So we're happy that we're still doing something, but of course we would love to be in Galway, especially after the videos we saw a bit earlier.
Oh yeah, they were good.
Well, Maura, please.
Okay. Fáilte go Gaillimh, Huskeri Rima Galéir. That's my bit of Irish there. Welcome to all the Rima delegates. Welcome to Galway. But unfortunately, you're only in Galway virtually, and we hope you do get a chance to come to Galway in the future, a real thing. I hope some of you attended our lunchtime concert, La Fresca Rosa, and enjoyed the trip from Galway to Limerick to Italy. And we have a lot more on going all over Europe from Galway. And we hope you get a sense of Galway, even though it's all virtual. My name is Maura Cróinín, and I'm the director of Galway Early Music Festival. I'm the moderator for this afternoon's conference on making early music in Ireland. And please feel free to use the chat to give any questions that you would like answered, and we'll see if we can either answer them at the time or we might leave them till the end to look at. We'll see about that. So making and promoting early music in Ireland has some very unique aspects to it, although they might speak to some other smaller areas of Europe that are on the boundaries or out in the middle of the sea. So maybe you might find this interesting. Ireland is a part of Europe, but it's an island far off the coast of mainland Europe. It has a close cultural relationship with its nearest neighbour, the United Kingdom, but the relationship also has a long history of political and cultural conflict. So both of these things have had an impact on the history of music in Ireland and the making and promoting of early music in modern times. Our panel of speakers will be looking at the strengths and the weaknesses and the opportunities there are for early music in Ireland today. So the first thing I want to do is to introduce our panelists, and maybe they could wave their hands. First, Siobhán Armstrong. There she is, she's waving. She's one of Europe's best known harpists, playing pre-1800 repertory on reconstructions of medieval to Baroque instruments. Siobhán performs and records early church, chamber music and opera with some of the most respected early music directors, ensembles, orchestras and opera companies in Europe, and collaborates with significant traditional musicians in Ireland. In Irish music, she places herself where historical meets traditional. For more than 25 years, she's been exploring the neglected repertory, playing techniques, and idiom of the early Irish harp. This is also the subject of her PhD, which she is nearly finished, just a few corrections to do, and she's nearly Dr. Siobhán Armstrong. She's the founder of the Historical Harp Society of Ireland, and she will be talking about some of her work in that area today, because it's very important to how we develop early music in Ireland. Mark Duley is, where's Mark Duley gone? There he is, waving. He's one of Ireland's most well-known choral specialists and has led workshops and masterclasses for choirs and conductors in Ireland, the UK and continental Europe. He founded Resurgam Chamber Choir in 2003 with the aim of establishing it as Ireland's premier project-based choir. That aim he has accomplished. He's directed the choir in numerous concerts and tours and over a wide range of repertoire. Resurgam will be in the final concert, live-streamed, in our concert festival with a beautiful program of Bach and before, and Siobhán will be playing the harp in that, so very involved in the festival. He's directed the choir in numerous concerts and tours over a wide range of repertoire. Mark was born and raised in Hawke's Bay, New Zealand, and came to Ireland in 1992. He's held several major posts in this country, including organist and director of music at Christchurch Cathedral, Dublin, chorus master to the RTE, which is the National Radio and Television Broadcasting Company, the RTE Philharmonic Choir, artistic director of the Irish Baroque Orchestra, which you'll be hearing about, and artistic director of the organ festival Pipeworks. And then Vlad, is Vlad still with us somewhere?
Yes, I'm here. Hello.
There he is, but we still don't have him in motion. Tenor Wolodymyr Vlad Smishkewych has performed and recorded with artists and directors as diverse as Sequencia, Theatre Voices, Carlos Nunez, Hesperian 21, the Harp Consort, Ars Nova Copenhagen, Ensemble Dialogus, Christoph Rousset, Peter Sellers, and Andrew Lawrence King. He holds a Doctor of Music and Voice Performance from Indiana University, and in 2011 he moved to Ireland, where he taught to become director of the MA in Ritual Song and Chant at the University of Limerick, where he taught until 2014. In 2015, he entered the world of broadcasting as the first producer and announcer of Rima Radio, Rima's web radio and podcast platform, from its founding until 2018. Here in Ireland, he's known to radio listeners on the national public broadcaster RTE Lyric FM as an announcer and programme writer and host of Ireland's weekly early music programme, Vox Nostra, which is an early music programme in more ways than one. It's on Sunday from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. It's early music and it's very early, but it's a well-loved programme. Together with historical keyboardist Jonit Kosowski, he's co-founder and co-director of the Limerick Early Music Festival, our newest festival in Ireland. Its first iteration was in March. And of HIPSTER, an acronym for Historically Informed Performance Series, Teaching, Education, and Research. So I'll ask questions and I'll ask people to answer. So the first question is, why early music? Can you each talk briefly about your background and your education and what got you into early music, what it actually means to you? And maybe I'll start with Mark.
Thanks, Maura. My introduction to early music, I think, was as a student in Auckland in New Zealand, where I was studying the organ, and we didn't have any organs built with mechanical action or according to sort of historic principles. So all the organ students had to play the harpsichord. And that was the sort of the epiphany for me. The Damascus Road moment was discovering what mechanical action instruments could do, and through the harpsichord discovering, of course, the world of early music in relation to the organ. We did a tour, actually. Kiwis, I don't know, it's because we live on the other side of the world and we're so far from anywhere, we always feel we've got to go traveling. I think my family still thinks I'm on my overseas experience, that eventually I'll go home again. But anyway, we all set off, the organ students from Auckland, on a European tour to go and see the instruments of Europe, and that was really where I think I sort of, that copper fastened my love for music from this period, if you like. That's where it all started for me. And then, of course, through choirs, I think with working in cathedrals, you're singing a lot of early music all of the time. So discovering what the voices could do, what this repertoire could bring to a choir's work was another moment for me that really introduced me into this world. That's it in a nutshell, I suppose.
Thank you. Maybe we can go over to Vlad.
Certainly. Thank you very much, Maura. Thanks for that, Mark. Well, gosh, how did I get into early music? I think my earliest memory of early music was when I was quite young, perhaps in high school, listening to recordings, LPs. They were of New York Pro Musica, doing madrigals, Narciso Yepes, maybe playing Spanish Renaissance guitar and modern guitar, because, well, this is one thing that I'll talk about later, but you never know how or when your entryway to early music might be. And for me, it was through some modern musicians introducing the repertoire, and then also people doing music with a bit of the thinking about historically informed performance style. So it led me to sing in a madrigal group in my high school. And I was fortunate to have a voice teacher when I got to university. This was in the USA, who had been involved in European early music ensembles himself. And he introduced me to composers like Schütz and Purcell, to lute song. We also did a lot of Bach, troubadour songs even. So between that and singing in chapel choir in the university, and also getting a chance to do a Baroque performance workshop at another university up in Canada, I decided to do early music for a master's over in Indiana, in Bloomington, where there was an early music institute. So this was around the mid 1990s, and by the late 1990s, I returned back to New Jersey, where I grew up near New York City. There were a few long-standing, some new ensembles there, visits often from European directors. And with all of these different opportunities, the chance to audition for these directors, it led to a decade and a half of performing, recording in the late 90s, early 2000s with a lot of European ensembles and directors. It also helped me come to Europe often while I was doing my own doctorate during that decade, and then to move here a decade ago. So I've been doing more teaching and working in radio and film since I've been here. Part of it is probably due naturally to the challenges of breaking into a new performing scene when you move countries, but it's been wonderful, and wonderful colleagues as well here in Ireland. I'd say that it seems the playing field for early music performers has of course become wider for the whole world in these last years, maybe more challenging, but also it's become more varied. And I think for me, it's been also a way to show that you can find your special place and area of interest within the early music scene.
Thank you, Vlad. And we're coming last to Siobhán Armstrong. Siobhán?
Hi, Maura. Hi, everybody. I suppose my first exposure to early music was when my sister, who was studying musicology at UCD at University College Dublin, brought home a recording, I suppose an LP of a Palestrina Mass. I remember it was the Misse Pape Marticelli. So I was a young teenager. I would have been 12 or 13 years old, and I heard polyphony for the first time. And so my life changed. That was an incredible experience. I had been singing since I was a small child and playing modern Irish harp. And I had a penchant anyway for singing earlier music. So even as a teenager, I was interested in downland lute songs and Purcell. And that carried on when I did a musicology degree at Trinity College in Dublin. I sang in the chamber choir at college. So I was exposed to everything from Bach double choir motets to madrigals. And then I went on to direct that choir. So I had hands-on experience at college. It was still largely a lot about singing. I think I did singing and harping in tandem because I sang in the RTE Chamber Choir, which is the only professional choir in Ireland. And again, the director Colin Mawby introduced us to a great range of Bach and some earlier music. At the same time, as a teenager, I was going to Glenstall Abbey in Limerick, the Benedictine monastery. I admit I was a very strange teenager. So I was going to this Benedictine monastery and learning how to sing plain chant from Neumes with the monks in choir. So that was also a pivotal experience, because plain song, as we know, underwrites almost everything that we do. After that, after I finished at college, before I went to college, the other pivotal moment for me was when Andrew Lawrence King came to Ireland to one of the Dublin early music festivals in the late 1980s. And he played a concert with his Arpa de dos órdenes, his chromatic Spanish harp, and his Arpa doppia, so a double-strung Italian harp. And I was reasonably virtuosic at the modern Irish harp, so that instrument which is strung with nylon strings, which was invented in the early 19th century. But I was always trying to play handle on it, and flip all the levers so I could do all the chromatics. And so when I heard Andrew play the kind of music that I loved on those instruments, the penny dropped. I went, here's the interface between the music I love, the thing I can do well, and the instruments that are appropriate. So I went off to Germany and studied with Andrew in Bremen in North Germany for a while. Came back to Ireland eventually by various circuitous routes that took in Australia and London, and wound up directing the Early Music Organisation of Ireland, which is the forerunner of our new Irish Early Music Network, which many of the early music festivals in Ireland now are in together as a network. And when I came back to Ireland, or maybe it was around that time or a little bit before, I realized that we had our own early harp. We had our own historical harps. I was playing everybody else's historical harp, medieval European Bray harps, a Spanish harp, and Italian harp, but I was still playing a modern Irish lever harp. And finally, the penny dropped that we have our own historical harp in Ireland. And that was the day I started running, and I haven't stopped since. That was more than 25 years ago. And that's now my passion, is to try and resurrect our early music instrument here. So that's my background.
Oh, thank you, Siobhán. So it's interesting, actually. We have a broad range of early music experience and performance. Siobhán is from Ireland, but went off to the continent to learn her continental harps. Vlad and Mark have come to Ireland to work and have stayed. And this gives us some interesting angles. Everybody has very different angles on the topic of music in Ireland, early music in Ireland. So maybe we could start with talking about, yes, I thought I was muted there for a second. Maybe we can start with talking about what our audience is and what are the challenges in developing that audience. Ireland has an interesting history. It has a history of conflict, as I said before, political and cultural, with our nearest neighbour, the UK. And it is far, in a sense, from the mainland of Europe, although we also have always been in very strong contact with Europe from the earliest times when we had the missionary monks going over, right up to when the armies of the Irish had to flee from Ireland and ended up fighting for the kings of France and various other places. So there's always been a lot of coming and going. This is very. There's also a lot of merchant activity back and forth. But for modern Irish early music promoters, I'm wondering if you guys can comment on the difficulties of developing an audience for early music in Ireland. What are some of the challenges of that? And maybe I'll start with Vlad. Would you like to start?
Sure, I'd be happy to put something in, although I probably have a strange perspective on it. By strange, I mean that I am coming at it from the role of a new promoter, a relatively new promoter compared to all of my colleagues here in Ireland who have been running festivals for up to 2.5 decades. And so I'd say that part of the challenges that I and my partner Yonit face in the developing of an audience is trying to find out whether we're going to follow the conventional accepted wisdoms or try to break out into developing new and different and unexpected audiences. The conventional wisdoms probably might be either play it safe with some of your programming, and then also have maybe 1 or 2 adventurous things on your festival program. Try to make sure you have something for the diehard audience that loves one style or another, especially if you cover the multiple centuries across the millennium of early music. And I suppose that could be one route that we're thinking we may have to go. But we temper that. I think as a new festival, we have several doors open to us, and that could also dictate or be a way to know whether we'll have success or not so much success, is to develop a liking for new audiences that might not be quite evident right now. And by not being evident right now, I mean that sometimes you may find that audiences are lurking in new places and in strange, different places you didn't expect. Sometimes an artist that you bring in may bring in their own type of audience, and that audience discovers early music for a first time. This happened to us when we brought in Rhiannon Giddens to our early music festival in March. She's a singer who is best known for bluegrass and for her own contemporary compositions, very socially immediate and relevant. And she also plays a historic instrument from the 19th and 18th centuries, the historic banjo, but it's not an instrument that you tend to see at most of the festivals that are in the RIMA network, perhaps. However, if you put all of that together, it means that there's an opportunity for a new audience. And if that is one example of how you can go down a new and different avenue based on the artists you bring, then perhaps that is one way of meeting a challenge that we all know we have. How do we bring in new people to our seats, to fill our seats, and to, in this case, to fill our Eventbrite pages, because we're doing so many things online. But I think that's one way, and I think one other way that we can also look at meeting these challenges that we've always had, and I think we all know what they are, of not bringing in people, is learning as much as we can from this year, what's worked and what hasn't worked. In fact, what hasn't worked often teaches us much more, and we can hopefully learn about what best to blend to adapt ourselves to the situation that we've had because of COVID, but also to find out what new audiences are lurking within technology. We may find the answer is quite unexpected, and we think that it's always going to sort itself out by age or other demographics, but it's not necessarily the case, because there are many people who are connected. They just do it in different ways. So I think meeting that challenge may also involve talking to people we haven't been talking to a lot before, who deal with the ways in which people interact with social media in the kind of social impact sense. When are people connecting, etc. That kind of stuff. So those are two of my thoughts on that.
Thank you, Vlad. You've brought us around a great number of areas of audience development there. I want to ask Siobhán, because Siobhán and I talk about this a lot, about this challenge to audiences in Ireland, specifically in a historical way. And how do you feel? Yeah.
I suppose I'm very interested to hear Vlad's perspective on bringing Rhiannon into his festival and what that brought to his festival, because I feel like it's similar for me with the Historical Harp Society, and also with the Irish Consort, with my own group and my own concerts, is that I try and sneak music past audiences who are maybe not so familiar with it. So in my own programming, I suppose because I wear two hats, because I sort of wear this Irish music hat and I wear a European early music hat, I love to explore that interface historically where they met. And Ireland is a particularly rich environment for that, because of course the Tudors arrived from England in the 1520s for the reconquest of Ireland, and so you have Anglo music and vernacular Gaelic music rubbing up, and then that keeps happening century after century in Ireland, where you have the descendants of the New English, as they were called, because of course we had the Old English who had arrived in 1169. I mean, you know, we can go back quite far if we want to talk about all those interactions. So the descendants of the Old English and the New English rubbed up against the Gaelic. So that gives me great opportunity to put those musics together in concert, because I play early European harps and early Irish harp. And so that gives me a perfect opportunity to get people to come to the concert because they want to hear one half of that. So they're the early music people who want to hear the viols and the lute, or they're the fans of my Shanno singer, Roisin Elsafty. So they're, you know, Roisin is a prize-winning traditional Irish singer. So her fans might come along to the concert, and then they're sort of forced to listen to the other music. And as Vlad has said, it's surprising and often wonderful to them. They might not go to the other genre of music, but if you present them, if you show how they're connected historically, and you can program interesting events, then that helps people to see past their natural prejudices, possibly. I mean, it's also interesting that it's not just at an audience level, it's at an artist level. It's important to bring artists together. I think what we see in Ireland, or what we have seen historically, is that the vernacular musicians see European art music performers as one homogenous group that they call classical music. So they don't differentiate. I don't think there's a great awareness of early music, of medieval, Renaissance, Baroque, classical, romantic music. It's all just classical music. Of course, that's not universally true. I'm speaking in broad strokes here, and there are individual vernacular performers who are very interested in Baroque music, and they see that there, for example, some of the vernacular Irish fiddle players would hold their fiddle in a quite a Baroque way. It would be chin off and Baroque, so they can possibly see the parallels with European historical music making. But the interesting thing is when you bring musicians together, the vernacular musicians who would possibly not be open to the rest of us, when they see the flexibility and the improvisatory nature of early music performance, they're surprised and probably delighted. And on the other side, the classical musicians, or even people who are involved in early music in Ireland, are not interacting so much with star vernacular performers who have incredible musicality and phrasing, and who are doing a similar thing to what we're doing, but maybe they're listening to archive recordings where we're looking at old manuscripts. So there's a lot to be gained by bringing those people together. And I had, for anybody who can attend the concert this evening of the Irish Consort, I had a really wonderful example of that at the first rehearsal. So the extraordinary piper and whistle player Ronan Brown, who's playing in the concert this evening, arrived and hadn't met Malachy Robinson, the bass viol player. And I was kind of intrigued because they're both extraordinary musicians. They're very versatile, very different, but both exceptional musicians. And I thought, I wonder what they will make of each other. And so Ronan was playing this exquisite slow air that I thought it might be nice to add the viol to. And so the two of them started, and then they kind of looked at each other, and you could see the bromance. You could see the love in their eyes as they recognized in the other a wonderful musician who was different, but utterly musical to the core. And that for me is at the heart of what I'm trying to do in music, is to bring people together and get them to open their minds and hearts to each other, and to be in my own work, of course, I want to be influenced. Both of those sides should influence each other. So if I'm looking at early Irish harp music in a dusty old manuscript, that's fine. I can have copy of the instrument built. I can look at the manuscript. I can decipher the dots on the page. But what I don't know is the idiom that those harpers played in the last of the harpers played in the 18th century. I don't know quite how they played, but maybe if I listen to somebody like Ronan Brown, who is in turn listening to the earliest archive recordings from the 1890s, and that's only a generation or two after my harpers die. So if he's channeling that and I listen to him, it gives me a road back into my historical music. So I think it's really vital that we're all open to each other, and that we access the embedded knowledge and skills that we all have. I'm not sure I answered your question. You asked a very different question. You can ask it again.
I'll ask it again, but that was fascinating. That's excellent. That's lovely. Mark, you're dealing mostly with choral music, which it seems to be in Ireland, people love voice and they love choirs. So they're singing early music all the time, but maybe they don't know they are. I mean, it's not something that they identify what they're doing as. Is this interesting for you, and does it make a difference to audiences and how you approach audiences or programming?
Thank you, Maura. Yes, it does. I think you're right. A lot of the time we have so many choirs in Ireland. I mean, as you say, people love to sing, and they are singing early music sometimes without realizing it's early music. And I think that's really interesting. I love the fact that it doesn't have to be early music in that way. I thought I might share actually my experience with Resurgam in the West, because we have worked very hard on audience building projects, particularly in the west of Ireland, where I found it actually rather strangely, it's easier to build audiences in the West than it is in the East, particularly in Dublin, which is a very sort of set concert life. I think it's harder to build audiences there in some ways. And I think early music has always had a pretty tough road to hoe in Dublin, because I remember when I came to Dublin back in the 90s, it was a real ghetto. I mean, and a very interesting ghetto, but you're talking about three families, I think, who were sort of responsible for the early music life of Dublin. And you could sort of put it down to that, and almost sort of religious affiliation as well came into it. It was a very, very sort of niche activity that belonged to a particular segment of the city. But what we have tried to do with Resogun, particularly in the West, is we have tried to build relationships with communities, particularly small communities, where there is a strong sense of wanting to be involved in something, wanting to participate, really wanting to sort of think outside the box. For me, that's the first thing. Not, we want to sing Palestrina or Monteverdi or whatever, that they just want to do something. They have a very strong community dynamic, whether it's a choir or a local music association, and they're just interested in new ideas. So we've built these relationships with local choirs where they work with us. We do workshops with them in advance of a performance on particular repertoire. And then we perform together. So we'll do some things on our own, we'll do some things with them, and they might do some things on their own as well. We've partnered with the English Cornet and Sackbut Ensemble in doing this, and we've got players over to come with us to the workshop sessions where they just sing with the instruments. And for me, that's been one of the most revealing things of all, because as we all know, so often the instruments tell us what to do. They show us things. And when a singer hears the way a wind player will articulate or will tune particular intervals and that sort of thing, it just shows them so much more than you could ever do in a lecture or in a conventional choral rehearsal. So that's been a real revelation, I think. But the other exciting thing about it is that some of the places we've been to, where they get very little live music making. I mean, everything here is so Dublin-centred, I find. And when you go to a place and you play not just Monteverdi or Schütz or whatever it might be for the first time, but classical music for the first time, or rehearsed art music, whatever you might like to call it, for the first time, that's the revelation. And I remember we did a program of Schütz and Praetorius, I think it was, in Lisdoonvarna. Lisdoonvarna is a very small village in the middle of the Burren in County Clare. Well known, I think, for a mating festival in the summer where you can go and get a bride or a husband. But anyway, we did a concert there, and we weren't looking for brides or wives or husbands. We performed this really quite, you would consider, esoteric program if you were thinking of what you were going to put on to try and build an audience. But for many people, it was the first time they'd ever heard trombones, for instance. And I remember someone saying to me, "My God, I had no idea about these instruments. They're amazing." So this person that I was talking to, his first experience of a trombone was this sackbut playing Praetorius and Schütz with singers. And I thought that was marvelous. We had a huge audience and they were so responsive. And that has been our experience in quite a few of the places we've performed. So I suppose what I'm getting at here is that we start with the community, really. We look for a place where there is someone who's prepared to come on board with us and build a local relationship. And then we find it's just pushing open door after open door. People really want to be involved. They want to play, they want to sing, and they'll come to the events as well. So that's been, for us, the sort of the revelation. I think it will be much harder to do that in a larger metropolis, like in Dublin. I know it would be harder to do it in the way we've done it, but in the West, it's been a very interesting experience for us.
That's fascinating. Sounds fabulous. And I can imagine how people react to the sackbuts and trumpets and the voice, because it is just the most incredible combination. Yeah, so we have a lot of audience building to do. And I really like that idea of centering it in the community, because it is very hard to build audiences. In Ireland, I suppose anywhere it's really hard to. And we really want to build young audiences, people to come up and keep it going, so it doesn't just become older and older audience and then disappear again. We don't want that to happen. I wanted to just also ask about, we talk about building audiences, but what about the opportunities for people who hear something and find an interest in it, in pursuing it? So the music education in Ireland, what do we have in Ireland? What are the possibilities? And perhaps what is the possibility of actually pursuing a performance career in Ireland? Siobhán, maybe?
Sure, thanks, Maura. That's a little bit tricky for me to answer because I think I didn't build my career in Ireland. I spent, I started off in Germany. I moved to London. I moved back to Ireland in 1997, but then I spent probably a decade or two mainly working abroad because I suppose I was working with Les Arts Florissants and the main groups who were doing opera and chamber music in London and Paris. So it's more in recent years that I've started to sort of bed in my own country. And generally it's playing my early Irish harp. So I find that kind of amusing that my life is binary. It's like outside Ireland, everybody knows me as a Baroque triple harpist. And inside Ireland, everybody thinks I'm a traditional musician who plays early Irish harp, or sort of a weird sort of hybrid traditional something or other, something strange. They wouldn't quite know maybe how to define me. So the fun, I suppose, is that that's coming more and more together. I mean, I have the pleasure, I had the pleasure a few weeks ago, and again at our wonderful concert that we'll be broadcasting live for you on Sunday evening, I have the absolute pleasure of singing with the extraordinary Zorgan and Mark Duley. They're just phenomenal. It's exactly what I do abroad, but now I'm getting to do this in Ireland, to work with 5 and incredible singers, and to do the music that I love, Schütz, Schein, the pre-Bach, the early German music working up to Bach. So that's a kind of a new thing for me. It might be slightly COVID related. It might be a positive thing from COVID that we all have to use musicians who are in our countries and on our islands. So of course it would be much more appropriate for Mark to go and get a lute player to play Bach. And I'd be the first one to put my hand up and admit, though I would say that there were harps in Germany at the time. So, but possibly not in Leipzig in the church. So I think that's it. We can try to, as groups, we can try to build opportunities for artists here in Ireland to have work at home. But that wasn't my experience for a long time. But hopefully it's changing. Within my own organization, I'm trying to build opportunities because it's a fledgling thing. This revival or this rediscovery of our early music harp in Ireland doesn't go back very far. So it sort of goes back to the 1970s with Cróinín, who was the first person in modern Ireland to play the instrument. We've been in existence for 20 years, so we're starting to have the first professional performers who've come through our training, as it were, the first professional teachers and performers. So I see it as my job to get the funding so that we make opportunities for artists to earn their living by teaching, by performing. Now, next year, hopefully by doing Zoom classes. So we're building new opportunities all the time for artists within Ireland and also for historical harpists internationally, because a lot of the expertise resides outside Ireland for this instrument, with Anne Heyman in America or Andrew Lawrence King, who's now based in Estonia. So we try and get all of the expertise to Ireland for our festival once a year. So we're trying to grow opportunities for people here and for other historical harpists in Europe at the same time. So that's where we would be on that for the moment.
Thanks, Siobhán. Okay. So Vlad, you have some experience in working in third level and in music, chant actually. So maybe you could talk to us a little bit about education and opportunities.
Sure, thanks. And following on from what Siobhán said, she's actually brought up a lot of things that I had remembered encountering during my time teaching at third level, but also now encountering in the work that we're doing here in Limerick with Hipster and with the Limerick Early Music Festival. Now, I mean, the state of early music education itself, if there is such a thing here in Ireland, is a bit of a mixed bag in the country. We have recently had good fortune in having a Department of Historically Informed Performance Studies, HIP studies, created at the Royal Irish Academy of Music in Dublin. And the Irish Baroque Orchestra also has a history of being involved formally and informally, I think, with UBO, the European Union Baroque Orchestra, and its educational remit, as it were. I think this may be, I may be corrected by my colleagues in Irish Baroque Orchestra, but I do believe that many of the members have passed through UBO's ranks. So that's a wonderful relationship there and synergy in terms of passing on the knowledge from our colleagues throughout Europe and bringing it to Ireland, and then vice versa, going from Ireland into Europe. But so they have also had interesting outreach and didactic projects from Irish Baroque Orchestra aimed at increasing the knowledge of performance practice, especially between about 1650 or 1800, so which I think is mainly the orchestra's remit. But those positives that I've just mentioned about these two institutions also kind of show what there is unaddressed, what there is lacking. The institutions are in Dublin, as Mark earlier pointed out. That means that things seem to be centralized a lot around the capital in terms of that specific early music education. And while we're a small country, I mean, you can drive well across Ireland within the day, but there's still a feeling that these teaching and learning opportunities are centralized around the capital, not always happening maybe as often as they should or could in the other cities and counties and provinces of Ireland. There's the course which you mentioned, Maura, the MA in Ritual Chant and Song at the University of Limerick. I used to direct that. It's currently being directed by a scholar who's a musicologist in Dominican chant. And so that's a forte of that course, but it doesn't specifically aim to produce professional performers per se. It's a course that mixes the performance, the musicology, and the ritual studies. My colleague, Yonik Kosowski, also teaches at the University of Limerick, piano, harpsichord, but there's only one harpsichord there. There are no historic pianos. And no formal course pathway to study historic instruments or historically informed performance practice. It goes under the MA in classical strings. So these are the challenges that we face institutionally at third level. And then, you know, there are the stylistic remits of the opportunities that do exist, Baroque and classic music, classical era mostly. In terms of the Baroque and classical training for performers in performance practice, there's not yet any entity doing a formal year-round training outside of Dublin's Royal Irish Academy. In terms of Renaissance or medieval music, there's nothing of formal training happening anywhere on the island, with the exception that I noted above with the MA in chant. And however, there is the work that Siobhán and her colleagues have been doing with the wire-strung harp, and she's spoken well to the work that they've been doing there with the festival in Scóil na Cléirseach, the festival of early Irish harp. And so they are doing teaching, especially in the summertime and throughout the year with their events. The choirs would be also present in some of the third level institutions, and a lot of colleagues teach the choral music, much of it early, harpsichord, there's recorder, there's bowed strings outside of the formalized program pathway. So what there is happening though around the country are plenty of these outreach events that we as festival producers are doing. And this is during the festival times, year round. Each organization presents it as part of their work. It's important groundwork, and it gets the younger people in society exposed to early music during these schooling years. But I feel I'm probably echoing my colleagues' frustration around the country through our conversations we've often had, to say that there's a bit of a gap between the outreach that we do as festivals and the result that we necessarily see if and when those people we've touched and affected by the music and the outreach become early music artists themselves. Or work in the field somehow. So without courses at third level university stage of education, the majority of Irish musicians who are training for this at the third level go through common practice training at a conservatoire. And if they're fortunate enough to come in contact with somebody who plays early music or historically informed performance practice teacher, then they might get a start on a historic instrument. But it's pretty guaranteed that they're probably going to leave Ireland, at least at some point, to go elsewhere for their dedicated studies, and not all of them return to Ireland. So it seems we have a kind of a pathways problem, if anything. We reach audiences at different stages in life, and it's wonderful to see what what Mark's doing for the community contacts with different performances in the choirs. If we're fortunate enough to hook people, especially as they're younger and going into schooling, and get them interested in early music, how can we keep them? We don't have very many primary or secondary school level experiences for early music minded performers, especially in a country that has other strong musical traditions. The band tradition is very active here all throughout primary and secondary. So you'll have a lot of brass bands and wind bands. That's something that we could probably easily hook in. And I'll mention maybe this later in our in our talk here with the panel, that we're going to try to be doing some of that with bands and early brass winds as well here around Limerick. But youth orchestras do well. That's another opportunity always to hook into those institutions. But if you have someone who sees a viola da gamba at your festival, and that young listener goes gaga for the instrument, how do you keep them interested? Where do you send them? Who can get them a loaner instrument to borrow and learn on? Regular lessons, consort playing if it's gamba. And then what happens after high school? There's nowhere here that you can go to study major field studies in viola da gamba performance. I'm unaware if there are. And I wrote an article a few years back about what the state of early music in Ireland was, and I had the same issues to say, with the exception that we didn't have the program in Dublin at the Royal Irish Academy at that point. So that was one nice advancement there. But I think the more mainstream early instruments might have it a little easier in terms of recruiting and invisibility and visibility, excuse me. Orchestral bowed strings, recorders, these pathways might be a little bit clearer, and there may be teachers. Although there's probably still friction whenever you get a modern teacher from an older generation that says the early music's going to spoil your technique or something. And with voice, luckily that's changed quite a bit since the days of the 90s when I went through school. Vocalists might have some things a little bit easier, though again, it's the repertoire still much more on the later end of things, is what gets taught prevalently, and directed, singers get directed towards that, with the exception of kind of the Renaissance and early Baroque choral and chamber music. So what there is very little of is discussion about sources and training, specifically on sources, stylistic matters. And even for those who perform this music professionally, I mean, I have several colleagues in the country who, though they're performing this regularly at a very high level in professional settings, they themselves personally haven't done any formal training, perhaps in, say, ornamentation, sources, and so on. So they very much would welcome at this point in time the chance to do so. Not everyone in Ireland has a chance to leave for a year or two to go do specialized study elsewhere. And so to have this more locally accessible would be an excellent thing for the early music landscape here in Ireland.
Thanks, Vlad. That's comprehensive, I think. I was going to ask Mark if I think we've covered the education, but the Irish Baroque Orchestra is an interesting example of the growth of the early music scene in Ireland. And I'm wondering if you were in on the very beginning of it, and I'm wondering if you could just talk to us a little bit about the Irish Baroque Orchestra and how it started and how it's developed.
Sure. Well, it started back in the mid-90s as Christchurch Baroque. So it was an ensemble we set up at Christchurch Cathedral to play at events there, which were sort of quasi-liturgical, so sacred music, but not necessarily in a liturgical setting. It was quite a nifty sort of delicate footwork required with the Arts Council to get the funding, because of course it was as part of an ecclesiastical institution. So it was a tricky one, but they put the money forward. We had strong advocates in the form of Tim Thurston at the time, who did a lot of groundwork for us in setting it up. He was able to make some pathways that enabled that to happen. And so in the early days, we weren't playing on period instruments. We were playing on modern instruments, and it was a gradual change. We got bows next. We had my co-director, Therese Timoney, was and is a very experienced player, and she was able to lead the group and she plays both modern and Baroque. So she was able to help them negotiate around using their modern instruments, playing Baroque music. So it was a very creative period where we were really finding our way with these very good modern players. They were all professional players, many of them playing with the symphony orchestra and so on, and getting into this area for the first time. So it was virgin territory, and we really felt that sort of sense, almost like the hand of history, that we knew we'd started on something here. And I remember the first performance of Handel Messiah we did, where we just got our new bows. I'm sure if we listened to a recording now, we'd probably throw up our hands in horror at some of the moments. But there was just the sense of suddenly this door had opened. It was a very exciting time. Then the orchestra, I think once it had got going, it was time for it to develop. So it then became the Irish Baroque Orchestra and moved out of the confines, if you like, of the cathedral, and since then has gone from strength to strength. I think one of the very important elements of the orchestra's work has been education. Really, from the early days, we tried to create places within the orchestra for student players. And I think now this work that the orchestra is doing in the Royal Irish Academy of Music is so fantastic, because one of the issues here, and Vlad has spoken about this already, is what is happening at third level in terms of music education for early music. And it's still the case here that in many cases, the teachers are not really aware of the opportunities. They still see the idea of playing this repertoire or using instruments appropriate to the repertoire as something that is going to ruin your technique, or it's something unfamiliar, it's something foreign even. And that's a big problem for us, because until we have teachers who are at least aware of the possibilities, and furthermore might sense the enthusiasm of a particular student for going down that route, and then, as Vlad says, for there to be a pathway for them to do it, then it is the case that they're going to have to go abroad, unfortunately. And of course, I'm always aware of the people that we lose, the young people who never get that opportunity to see, whether it's a viola da gamba in a concert, or what, that moment that is transforming for them. Here it's serendipity. You may be lucky, you may get that chance, but for many, they never do. And I think that's a great shame. I really feel this in the vocal area, where we have singing teachers at third level here who are still, by and large, there are some notable exceptions, but by and large, many of them training would-be opera singers. And no one is actually sitting back and saying, hey, these people are never going to get work. We're not going to be able to find operatic careers for all these opera singers that we're training. We should be showing them other things that they can do. They should be learning the skills that will not only make them great singers of earlier repertoire, but also will make them better musicians, that they will be good consort performers, that they will develop a good ear for tuning, all the things that we try to develop when we're singing in consort, singing earlier repertoire. These are great skills for any musician, regardless of what they go on to do. And if we were showing our young singers that there were employment possibilities here, if they wanted to go down that particular road, would be a great thing. But so often it's the case that just those opportunities are never given them, or they're never made aware of them. And it breaks my heart to hear young singers coming to audition or whatever, you might come across them in one way or another, and they have fabulous voices, great sort of intuition as musicians, but they've just had no training or experience, and here they are actually embarked on a professional career. So yeah, I think those are the huge challenges for us. I think we're way behind there I think the Royal Irish Academy is leading the way here, so I hope the seeds that are being sown there will spread to the other institutions.
Oh, that's great. Thanks a lot. That's very interesting. I just want to say that Alia from the Irish Baroque Orchestra is here with us, and the Irish Baroque Orchestra is one of the most recent new members of RIMA, so we welcome them, and they are doing wonderful work here in Ireland. Okay, so I just want to go on, and we don't want to go on for too much longer now, but what I did want to talk about was our links with Europe and Ireland's current early music festivals and promoters and performers, and what kind of links we can make through RIMA with Europe to help with this education problem, really, or to help with the opportunities there are for anybody in Ireland who's interested in early music. And then on the other hand, what we might be able to offer to the musicians in Europe? Is there some things that maybe we can set up where there's exchanges? And I think I'll go first to Vlad on this because he's been thinking about this a bit.
Thanks, Maura. Yeah, sorry, I don't want to steal the microphone too much, and I absolutely, I'm thrilled that that my colleagues have been, that we're sharing so many of these kind of concerns, but within this broader community of our European colleagues, because it may help us to develop what we need to develop to the next stage. So, what I did want to talk about a little bit is what we're doing here in this area of Ireland, and also about what we are very excited about, which is the Irish Early Music Network. And that's something that was just briefly mentioned and alluded to by my colleague Siobhán, who very correctly pointed out that there was already an organization in Ireland that was the nascent organization for presenting early music and educating about it, the Early Music Organization of Ireland, which she headed in the 90s for a period. And although that wasn't active for a number of years, and the different festivals were, as you could say, passing the baton of the EMOI forward, we now do have an organization that brings our festivals together in a way of bringing kind of showing how l'union fait la force, a perfect example of it. It's something that we do to join forces with all of our colleagues around the country to do these things that we couldn't easily do on our own, logistically or financially. So when the government here in Ireland, the Arts Council, offered funding for organizations, especially groups of them, to create new ways for building capacity and audiences, we applied first 3 of our festivals, East Cork and Galway, and ourselves at Limerick Early Music Festival, for ongoing outreach and teaching and concert broadcast equipment technology. We applied as a consortium, and we called it the Irish Early Music Network. So we got that funding, and then we brought in our 3 colleagues, and together we're now going to be able to do more, from training and outreach to sharing information and knowledge and resources. Plus, we help each other in the promotion of one another's events, which is always something we all know. People power can't be, it's never enough to be able to promote our festivals and spread the word and get all the things done. Social media always takes the time and energy. So again, we're stronger together in this sense, very much so. And we're the youngest festival here in Limerick, the Limerick Early Music Festival. It came about that a few years ago, since we wanted to bring in artists that we'd like to collaborate with and to increase the amount of high quality early music concerts here in the Limerick city area and around, which is a very beautiful place where counties Clare, Tipperary, and Limerick all connect, and near the lake called Lough Derg. And my colleague Yonit Kosowski and I started a series, kind of an organization series and entity called Hipster, which stands for Historically Informed Performance Series, Teaching, Education, and Research. It's one of these things where it does what it says on the tin. It's we have a series of different concerts that we organized and are organizing, and we present workshops, outreach events, we go to schools, and eventually we do want to do the research part through perhaps a conference, but we participate in conferences, and of course we're doing our own research. So this eventually we hoped would tie in with a festival, and it has. By this year, 2021, we started the first Limerick Early Music Festival. But it all started with our friends in Galway, because we presented a concert in Galway City back in 2017, I think it was, of Seicento, music for winds and brass winds and keyboards. And from there started setting up more and more concerts. And we'd also been doing this through our teaching at the University of Limerick, because we could bring in the performers to bring in performance practice and its study to the area. So we launched Hipster in 2020 in the middle of COVID, and then the new festival now in 2021, close to St. Patrick's Day, which means we'll keep all the tourists close and in Ireland for Early Music Day, because they're only 4 days apart. And so that works out very well for us. But it's also a good reason to come to Ireland for Early Music Day, if any of you are interested. So this is part of what we're doing in this corner of Ireland, and we're trying to address precisely some of those things which my colleagues and I have been mentioning now over this last seminar, this last conference. That's, we need to have courses in place that provide those pathways until the official institutions get it into their minds and their curricula, that they have to get a pathway formally created for students to follow. So that's part of the promoter's side of also addressing these various questions we face.
Thanks, Vlad. I'm thinking maybe we could kind of talk about how RIMA can help Ireland, help us. And I'm thinking especially about emerging, which for the last few years I have been trying to get anyone who's actually interested in the performance of early music in Ireland to think about, to, if they have an ensemble or if they're learning in the RIAM, and say, there's this opportunity in Europe. And it's really, I think, important for our musicians to make those connections. And I'm wondering how, anybody got any ideas how we can kind of get that started, to get them involved in emerging. And then maybe through all of our festivals, we would be able to set up some type of place where emerging European groups could come and do the emerging internship. I don't know if anybody has any ideas about that. I kind of open it to anybody. Does anybody have anything to say there?
Maybe I can just make a precision, precise this a bit. I think it would be, of course, a very nice idea, just to make sure everyone knows. So emerging is not RIMA. Many members of emerging are actually also members of RIMA, so we know very well about the project, but it's two separate projects and organizations. I'm just wondering if you've ever talked to Pierre or someone at Ambronay about this, about the possibility to involve some Irish concert halls, festivals mainly, I suppose, in the program, so that it might get better known in Ireland as well, and so that also Irish ensembles would hear more about it.
That's a good idea. I think Limerick Early Music did have one of the ensembles. Palisandra?
And Limerick Early Music Festival, we're very interested in the concept of being, hopefully, or we started Hipster with this in mind, that maybe one day we could become part of the emerging project as a location, as one of the destinations. But I think now that, and if I may, also mention that the Irish Early Music Network, as a network, that could be one of its strengths, that we could look forward to seeing how the network as a whole could be involved, perhaps, in the emerging project. That obviously has to be discussed with emerging itself, but as an idea, the interrelationship and the interface between our festivals creates a stronger possibility for people to want to come to Ireland, because they can see, oh, my project might fit best with doing something in Galway or in Ardee or in Limerick or Sligo or whichever, Cork, or it's a harp thing. So we have those options because of the network. So it may be something to consider. And obviously those are bridges yet to cross. But I'd say that would be something that we could all aspire to in Ireland, to try to be a destination anyhow for our colleagues and students to come.
So I think I've come to the end of the questions I think I was going to be asking. Is there, I don't know if anybody has any more areas that they'd like to cover, Siobhán or Mark, or have you said your say? So basically the early music scene is actually growing in Ireland very slowly. We have, how many festivals do we have now? 6 festivals, I think. Yeah, we have 6 festivals in a very small country. They're nicely spaced out. And we have a number of ensembles, a number of individual musicians, which is fantastic, because as we have found during the COVID restrictions, we've been able to put together wonderful ensembles of musicians to present from within Ireland. And that has certainly grown since I came to Ireland in 1975. So it's looking good, but there are obviously still many, many challenges. And I think the biggest challenge is in education and opportunity for anyone who takes an interest. And we have people who are working on that, like Mark's Ray Surgam and the Historical Society of Ireland, the Irish Baroque Orchestra, the RIAM. So there's lots of gleams of light all over the place. And so we hope we can, with the help of RIMA, actually, because it's very important for us to be linked with a big organization, European organization like that, to continue the progress and continue to grow our audience and our performers. Yes, Siobhán.
I'd just like to, at this point, pay tribute to you, Maura, and your work over the last 25 years with Galway Early Music, because you've been an inspiration to me personally, to the Historical Harp Society, with whom you're also involved, and you work many hours for us. You've worked with Resurgam. I think we all see the seed that you planted 25 years ago and how it bears fruit in ways that, you know, maybe even you don't realize, you know, the opportunities that you've given us all to do programs at Galway Early Music Festival. And then, you know, other festivals come along, like Vlad pointed out that he saw what you were doing. He came and did a program and it sets him off. So it's really inspirational if you have people who seed ideas, you know, in different decades. So I just wanted to wish Galway Early Music Festival a happy 25th birthday.
Thank you, Siobhán. Thank you. And I think we should mention one thing that we haven't mentioned is funding in Ireland and the support from what kind of financial support is available from public bodies. And on behalf of, I think, all of us, we have to thank the Arts Council of Ireland, which is very supportive. And also our local areas, city councils, county councils, they are also very supportive. One place that's very difficult for all of us in all the arts in Ireland is private or business sponsorship. Very difficult, but some people are very good at it. There's not quite such a tradition of supporting the arts, although it's increasing. So thanks, Siobhán, for those kind words. And
not at all. If I could just add also, I'd like to thank Music Network and the Department of Arts and the Gaeltacht and Heritage, because they, for example, have sponsored a very unusual thing, which is we have the first ever rental bank of historical harps in the world to rent to people who want to play. And they're all measured copies, measured student copies of harps from the National Museum of Ireland and other museums. And that wouldn't be possible without capital sponsorship from the Arts Council through Music Network and the Government Department of the Arts. So we're really grateful for that kind of sponsorship as well. It's very helpful.
Yes, yeah. So it's good to know there is that support out there for what we're trying to do, and it does help, that's for sure. We want to thank them all. So I don't know, Mark, if you have anything else to say on that subject? Nope. Okay. I think we're finished, unless people have any questions. We'd love to hear from anybody if they have any questions. Yeah. Yes.
It's strange. I'm trying to speak well. It's strange Ireland is not so developed in early music, because England is.
Oh, well, now you've just opened up.
Wow. Okay, Maura, do you want to explain or shall I?
I think Siobhán.
Oh, that's always very dangerous, Maura. I'm not sure I'm the one who should explain. Maybe we should
politics.
Yeah, maybe we should explain that Ireland didn't get any kind of autonomy until the 1920s, and we didn't actually become our own country until the 1940s. So we're really quite a young nation. We're a very old nation. We have the oldest, vernacular. We have the oldest manuscripts in a vernacular language in all of Europe. So our culture is very ancient. but as a nation, we're very modern. And so we have suffered from the vicissitudes of colonization for hundreds and hundreds of years. And so that impacts hugely on where we are vis-a-vis European art music culture. So I'll stop there.
Well, I think we do have to say that the other thing is that the traditional music in Ireland has a very strong
impact,
and
yeah.
It's in a sense it's set against classical music of any kind, and that includes early music, and that means that it's more difficult in a way to get people interested in classical music.
Yeah, understand
That's
it.
one thing.
Yes.
I think the biggest thing, and now I'm an American, so I can say this. I came and I had an interest in early music from when I was young in California. You know, why? Who knows? But yeah, I did. And when I came here and I got involved in early music, one thing I noticed was that all of us who were involved in early music were not Irish. And the second thing is that Irish audiences didn't have any background at all. It wasn't part of their, and what they did identify was that it was English, and they weren't having anything of it. There is a definite there was a definite reluctance to do that. And then of course you're saying to them, but it's not English, it's European, it's everywhere. It's just, you know, this is this fantastic music. And it's your music too. I mean, it's the 25 years of the Galway Early Music Festival. One of the big things that I've been trying to do is to open this out to everybody, to say, this is your music too. And Siobhán is fantastic in the way that she's approaching it, because she's really doing the research and making that available to people to